I'm going to declare this open. I think 3 is a quorum, isn't it? We're not going for a minion. It's been a month since we've had a current events. Thank God the world stood still during this month, so nothing's happened. What I thought we'd do today, I've got about 5 topics. I'll just mention them. And then let's just start talking about them in sort of an open conversation. I'd rather do more listening than talking. And in the course of this discussion, we can kind of fill out the agenda for the next several weeks, and among other things, get some ideas about outside speakers that can come in and inform us about things. I always think that lies are better told by outsiders. So I've heard that. On my short list, of course, this godforsaken COVID. I wish, and I'm sure you all agree with me, that 2 years on, we still wouldn't be talking about the same pandemic. And the implications of COVID for, I think, a whole host of things. I keep thinking how fortunate we are in our community and this institution to sort of be beyond COVID. In a sense, I mean, I think there are very many things in our lives that we would otherwise be doing or not doing. But for our children and our children's children, for high school students, for people who are not going to have a junior prom or a senior prom, or the kind of in-classroom teaching that just was a normal practice in this country, or in all countries all around the world. Just think about these 2 years delay in the lives of people. For us, it doesn't matter much what if it were 20% of our life, what if we were 10, and those 2 years were taken out. So that's topic number 1. Certainly, I think it would be interesting to talk a little bit about if any of us think we've had a bad day. John Woodard and I fall down a little bit. Just think about Biden's day. I mean, he came to town to govern, and now what? Of course, he came down to govern without a Congress, which we can clearly say with this thin majority, it was not meant to be. There was not meant to be transformative change, not with a 50-50 Senate. And for those who are on the Republican side, delighted that this Congress is not going to allow the president to do very much. But then, when is that going to change? If in fact, what we've created somehow is a system of government that can guarantee nothing happens, is that government? And maybe the right government. I mean, if you think about what Adam Riet talked about to us, any government's bad government. Don't let the government do anything, because whatever they attempt to do, they'll do it poorly. Then he'd be probably quite happy that Congress is set up as a stalemate. It's not as though the Republicans will be able to do something in a filibuster-prone Senate after 2022 or 2024. It'll still be, okay, we'll just switch which party says no to everything. Is that the kind of government we want? So that's, and under the subject of Biden, I put the problems he has with Congress, the problems he has with a whole agenda that he came to town to introduce. And I think the significant part of that problem is he didn't have enough majority. When other presidents have done transformative things, they've done so with a 65 Senate majority. And the theory was we can lose 5 and still beat the filibuster. But 50-50, you can't do much at all. Related to that is another, I think, headline topic of inflation. If this is caused by all the government largesse And we're going to have to go through a period of time of absorbing that largesse, that this whole idea of people resigning because they just don't want to work anymore, perhaps only possible because there's been so much government spending. Soon that'll be gone and people are going to be forced to go back to work again. I don't know. And is inflation linked to that? Or is inflation linked to supply things? I was in a meeting briefly before coming here this morning with Bruce, who was sitting in the back row, and he has a coffee table on the floor because the supply chain delivery process can't provide the equipment. I understand buying appliances right now is kind of an interesting challenge because you have to be satisfied with a refrigerator that doesn't refrigerate. Supply chain problems. I think about Ukraine. Have we solved the problem with 2 talks with Russia? Is it a real problem? Where's it going? Let me stop. That's just 4, I think, or 5 topics. What strikes you on that list or others as the most important things going on today? Thanks, Forrest. Welcome back. Good to see you again. Here's the mic.
I think one thing you need to put into the equation with inflation is that Biden's opposition to the petroleum industry.
I hear it. I almost want to ask you to elaborate further on it because coming from that industry. Let's Doug add his list first.
Well, I think several of your issues get combined together. I think with respect to Biden, maybe you're assuming he has more power than he realistically has. Now, on the inflation issue, I think more of the fault rests with the Federal Reserve. They have been pumping, $120 billion a month into the economy in terms of money. The first evidence of inflation was actually in the securities markets. Now, that's not quantified, or the headlines don't read inflation, but that's in fact what was happening. And of course, then you have, the people that own the securities are generally the wealthier people. And so where's the first place this shows up? It shows up in car prices. People can afford to get a gazillion-dollar car, where the man in the street is, he's looking at the used car, which is shooting up in value, and he's very pained that he either can't afford it or has to afford it, and it gives up something else. I think the inflation is not solely attributable to Biden. Certainly some of these bills that have been passed are contributory, but I think the primary responsibility is the Federal Reserve. One, they put too much currency in. Number 2, they haven't raised interest rates, which they could have done. And then 3, they have the ability to increase reserve requirements at the banks, which they haven't done. They haven't done that for quite a while. They also have the ability to increase margin requirements in the securities markets. And probably nobody here is probably investing on margin, but some of these younger people that haven't learned the management of risk are probably out there with their Robinhood account trying to leverage margin buying. But I think you mentioned the Ukraine. This is one of the things that Biden got elected on was essentially one of course was not Trump, but number 2 was taking a collaborative approach with respect to foreign policy, as opposed to a unilateral approach. But he hasn't been doing that. He's been kind of silent, not really leading with respect to NATO. Ukraine is a NATO issue. And of course, right now, of the former Soviet Union, there's only 5 of those republics left that are not leaning toward Russia. Those 5 being the 3, the Baltic states, Moldova, and the Ukraine. And you'd think that Biden would be leading something with respect to the United Nations on those.
Then again, he did get Moldova's part of our side on that.
Yes, as for the moment, yes, yes.
I was facetious. I mean, do you all have a lot of Moldovan ancestors or friends? But I do think it's critical that they're on our side in the great debate. That's fascinating. It never occurred to me to do the math the way you just did, that when you think about the breakup of the former Soviet Union, to think that it's pieced back together in terms of allegiances so completely is striking. I want to hear more about that. I certainly want to hear more about the idea that Forrest advanced, that part of Biden's problem was his inability to help me again.
I think basically just went to war against the petroleum.
The role of the petroleum industry in inflation and Biden's problems. Try to bring the mic up to Forrest. Thanks.
If you just think about the average person in the country, what they're paying for gas today prior to the election is quite different, double in a lot of places. And I feel like that's such a fundamental part of our economy, whether we like the climate control people like it or not. And I think it'd be one thing if we had a long progressive thought to go to renewables over time and eliminate the carbon problems. But we didn't decide to do that. He shut down basically fracking in most of the governmental control situation. He went to war with the pipeline coming in from Canada. They took the pipeline that served the Northeast. I mean, it's highly inflationary. And then you see it happening in wages in reaction to those price increases. And even here, we've seen it. We've got a message yesterday from Bruce itemizing things that we knew already. But he was talking about trying to solve that problem currently. But wages are hard to bring back. You can lower gas prices much easier than you can go from $13 or $15 an hour back to 8 or 9 or 10. I just feel like he unleashed a tiger, that he's got an inflation problem. And to show you the ineptitude of the Federal Reserve, they turned around 3 or 4 months ago, they were talking about transitory. Transitory, my foot.
Among other things, as I listened to Forrest on that, and in my mind I'm thinking about the possibility of having future days devoted to a discussion of some elements of this. I wonder if an energy expert, I mean, I pretend to be, but I've been out of the business for a decade and a half. But there are others that could talk to us about it, because my own impression about this is, well, first of all, I'm not altogether sure we want to go back to $8 an hour. Nobody can afford to raise a family on $8. And if we're going to jack up wages at the bottom, and it not be inflationary, there have to be fewer profits at the top. And what's not changing now is the profitability of being at the top, whether it be at the senior management level or sharers. I'm going to go to Charlie first, and then come back to you, Doug. But put a little flag in your minds. Let's talk about reordering the economy around higher wage at the bottom. What's that involve? Will it work? Can it happen? The second is petroleum.
Yeah, I'm thinking about Biden and what is going to influence or affect his chances for re-election. And I think all of the things you mentioned have some impact on how people feel about his success or lack of success. But I think the one thing that may be the deal maker, one way or another, is going to be how we wind up with these schools and the parents versus the administration of the schools, the union. This is we talk about other things, and yeah, it affects us, but this appears to affect people very close when you're talking about their children. And this may be a big game changer.
I think that's certainly true in Virginia, no question about it. And will the problems in Virginia, and it just began there, the Loudoun County particularly issue with parent involvement in the schools, and that's where the unfortunate comments about the parents don't have any rights to engage themselves in what's going on with their children, those comments originated there. The CRT problems are being talked about in Loudoun County, I think probably more than elsewhere in other counties that don't have it or try to bring it up. But I think that's a very fundamental point. We'll come back to it. Doug?
I'm going to take issue with the statement you made before that higher wages at the bottom automatically equals inflation. There's a couple missing elements in the middle there. One is productivity. If productivity goes up, it moderates the inflationary increase. And secondly, at a time like this, there is a tremendous temptation for more governmental regulation. And generally, the additional regulation will impede the productivity that could restrain the inflationary increases.
Both I think, good points. I mean, I wasn't the originator of the concept of wage push inflation. It's one that we've talked about over the decades. The concept of wages forcing everything else up. You raise the minimum wage and all other costs go up, but reflect that. Thus, there was no benefit to the wage earner to get a higher wage because everything else costs more.
There is one big difference today versus the prior times of wage push inflation.
Yeah.
Previously, the proportion of the economy that was represented by labor unions much larger than it is today. Today, the unions are generally limited to governmental jobs and some of the legacy industries in the United States. The other businesses are generally non-union, so we don't have the union push of wages, but we do have the market push of wages.
And what's causing the increase in wages today, if there is one? Market. But isn't that a good thing? Shouldn't we allow the market to function?
Yes.
And therefore, the wages that are too low, maybe wages here, should increase to the point that they're competitive in the community.
Yes.
Okay. And should they go back down again when?
The wages are on the stair step.
And if they go up and in that stair-step way, how do we put into the economy that new equation? Higher wages, $15 an hour is going to be the standard. Is it just all prices go up? Or do profits somewhere have to come down? Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Generally what happened with the higher wage is it makes technology more feasible. So some of these functions that are presently done by labor will be done by a machine, by technology. So that when someone is making $15 an hour, they're going to be more productive than they were someone that was making $8 an hour. I'll close with the one fear I have. I would not want the minimum wage to be increased in advance of where the market is putting wages.
Does that not leave the wage earner at a big disadvantage if he's dependent upon, or he or she is dependent upon?
No, I'll go back and tie this together with what Charlie just said. With the educational system and people being more productive, they're worth more money. Anyone here that has done hiring, you're looking for a higher skill set in the people you hire. Between education and experience and, I'm going to say, a culture, they're worth every nickel what you pay them.
Bill, are you raising your hand?
No.
Here we go. I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Sure.
Jim.
Yeah.
I think we need to consider what condition the country was in when Biden came in as president. We were in a traditionally very poor position so far as the Republican Party goes on foreign relations. We were kind of a zero in foreign relations, and that was a result of many different things. One, the complaints by the U.S. against NATO, the abandonment of the Iranian nuclear agreement, and whether we like it or not, Iran is a nuclear power and will be for years to come, and will be a major power because of that. Then you look at the domestic politics, it still has not recovered, because clearly, as more and more time passes and evidence comes out, the elections there was an attempt to abandon the elections in essence, and through the control of ballots going to the January 6th count, was a significant factor in, I think, morale. It's still hurting. I know I came from Georgia. In Georgia, the Secretary of State and actually the governor stood up to the attempt to get the Georgia votes changed. That's just new. The other material we were talking about are all problems, but we've faced those problems before and we've overcome them. Clearly, the Depression, our current economy, there's no comparison. The Depression was really an economic disaster. You don't see as many homeless, jobless people as you did in the pictures of the Depression. So anyway, I just think that we need to take this into account. Ukraine is an important country. It's a large country, both area-wise but population-wise. And it's, in a way, the number one defense against Russia, because Russia struggles with the impact Ukraine is having on the ex-Soviet satellites. They're clearly in a rebellion, if they could, against Putin. So it's a different world in the last 3 or 4 years, and that is, I think, a factor in our everyday life.
Thank you. Couldn't agree more with all your comments. Other thoughts on what we've talked about thus far? Neil? No, Neil.
So far,
I'm always looking at you, Bobby.
yes, sir. So far, we've been focusing on a litany of short-term problems, all necessary things to address, try to solve, etc. One of the things that concerns me is a longer-term problem, which is the difference between the two parties and the votes that are coming up in the next several years. State after state after state on a local level has been gerrymandered towards one party, not the other. The next election, 22, it'll probably show a significant shift towards the Republican Party away from the Democratic Party. I am a Democrat. The Democratic Party simultaneously has been squabbling among itself and not doing itself any good. It has got people like Manchin and that other lady voting as they're Democrats, but they're voting in favor of what the Republicans want. And these are the things that concern me in a 5-year looking forward, that this country will change radically. A lot of people will be delighted. A lot of people will be very disappointed. I do not know how Biden and the Democratic Party can wiggle out of it.
You know, I agree with your sentiments, Neil. Thank you. That the thing that troubles me the most about this is the functioning of a democracy. All of these other problems presumably could be, that's what government's there to do. There are problems, whether it's inflation or COVID, foreign policy, Ukraine. All those are things that are meant, know, they come up in every administration, and they're going to be addressed theoretically by this country the way we would traditionally address it. Well, that's all going to change if, number one, we cease to be a two-party functioning polity. I don't know that we are today. No, I don't know. We clearly are not functioning well today. And the problem is that in a 50-50, completely polarized environment, the Manchins, and I happen to think Manchin is representing his state probably pretty well. It's a 70-80% Republican state, voted 70 or 80% for Trump in the last election. For Joe Manchin to go in there and act as though he has a mandate to be a Democrat is, as much as I wish he were to say that's who I am, I'm a Democrat and I'll vote that way, he doesn't have a mandate to vote that way at all. And the fact that he identifies as a Democrat, putting Democrats in charge of the committees, probably irks a lot of his voters. In other words, that polarization exists in West Virginia as much as elsewhere. I don't understand Sinema. Frankly, just don't understand what she's about. How many of you heard her announcement last night about her speech about the filibuster yesterday? Almost, in my mind, nonsensical. But that's because, and I believe, frankly, Republicans found I just said it. The filibuster to be as objectionable as Democrats do today. Only, otherwise we wouldn't have the Supreme Court we have if we hadn't abolished it. Go ahead, Forrest.
I think one of the things that we all should understand about cinema, I'm sorry. One of the things I think we need to understand about cinema and her position on a variety of things is the border is a big issue in Arizona. Bigger probably than it is in Florida. We've at least got seas around us. They don't. Got a little river. And I think she votes the way she does because she knows where her support is.
Well, it's similar to Manchin. But Arizona wasn't 75% Republican, was it, in the election?
It's not that strong, but it's still,
I think it's right at the cusp.
in many ways, it's still a Goldwater state.
I think you're right. His last time, it's still a Goldwater state. It's clearly not a clear Democratic state, and thus Sinema was sort of a on the cusp thing. But why would any party, Republican or Democrat, want the filibuster? What's the value of the filibuster today? Phoebe?
Do you remember It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart? And he was sent to the Senate and he filibustered for something, I can't remember what it was. But he had to stand there and talk for like 30 hours straight. Now they've changed it, so you can just put in a piece of paper that says, I want a filibuster, and you can be in your own district, you're not even innocent. So that's the changes that have morphed, and they're very negative for us now.
And Phoebe, you're absolutely right. The fact that it's changed from its original condition to what it is today is a terrible change. But it's hard for me to sit here and say, I think what we should do is go back to a more rational, sensible approach where a man or a woman has to stand for 35 hours and talk from the elbow. Well, that makes a lot of sense.
That's hard to do.
But to me, it makes absolutely no sense. The filibuster was designed to prevent civil rights. Full stop. And had it not been for the Southern Democrats, and particularly Senator Russell, using the filibuster to stop every single effort to pass civil rights legislation, wouldn't be a need for filibuster. And now in a quote-unquote post-civil rights environment, theoretically, where we're all now recognizing the value of a society that's more or less equal in terms of voting rights and so on, we don't need the filibuster. We don't need to have people standing up like Jimmy Stewart and reading from the Yellow Pages for 30 hours, any more than we need somebody just handing a slip in and saying, I don't want that. Ought we not to be in an environment? And by the way, if I were a Republican today, and somebody said, we are no longer going to allow court appointments with a simple majority. Think about the impact that would have had on the 4 years of Trump's judicial appointments. Russell was a Democrat from the South who did that for civil rights. Let's be clear. The Democratic majority that Roosevelt had, that Johnson had, was essentially a Southern racist majority. And had they not had that majority, it's interesting to look back at policies of Roosevelt, over and over again, it seems to me anyway, as I read the history, he had to stop because he said, I need to capture the votes of those Southern senators, so I'm going to do things the way they want me to do it. That's why you're Republican. Good point. Very good point. Ken?
Well, I'll try and defend filibuster,
Thank
but
you.
I wish I had time to write up a paper about it. But what I'll say is, it's not in the Constitution about a filibuster. It's
Nope.
a Senate rule. Why it's 60-40, I don't know. Maybe it could be 55-45, something like that. But the thing is, unlike the House, which is the majority vote, and the House passes laws, they pass it to the Senate. The Senate is 100 members. It has time to debate the issues more. It's a more deliberative body than the House is. And the House changes over from one party to another. So if the vote was 50%, was majority, you'd have one party passing the laws, the next year, the next 2 more years, another party would come in, reverse those same laws, and the Senate would be constantly reversing, and they have to think about it more in the longer term, the bigger issues. Now, I don't think it's hurt the country thus far, except maybe during civil rights. I mean, has the filibuster real? I'm trying to think of laws that have been turned that didn't happen because of the filibuster. And, you know, the filibuster, just for everybody, I mean, I heard these numbers recently. In the Republican administration, they used about 300 in the House. I'm sorry, in the Senate. About 300 times. They've done the same thing with the Democrats. So both parties use the. I mean, it's amazing how many laws there are that have been filibustered.
Yeah, I think it's
What
an equal
are these laws?
opportunity.
I don't know how important they've been. But the point is, there is a value to having the Senate, you know, think through what the House has done. And again, I don't know where it's, offhand, I don't know where it's hurt us by having something filibustered to death.
Don? Thanks. Ken, those are excellent points.
You know, we have to keep in mind that the Senate is not a democratic institution, right? There's two senators for each state, regardless of size, regardless of population, versus the House, which is distributed by population, which is the democratic, if you will, way to do things. So we've got an institution, a structure in our government that is self-defeating almost. It keeps tripping all over themselves because of this. The country itself is so fractured into pieces of geographic and economic and political sections that they don't talk to each other. They really have a problem of even dealing with each other, talking across the aisle. What was it? Somebody once said that a key part of democracy is being able to lose, or being a good loser, whatever that term is. And that doesn't exist anymore. So it's we have a non-functioning government, I'm afraid. And where it's going to lead in the long term, I don't know, but it's scary.
It's scary. It goes back to what Neil said. I think that if we think it's scary now, wait until after this 2022 election. with voting rights dead, those laws passed in the states, 29 states have passed 19 pieces of legislation, not one of them designed to have more people voting and greater access to the polls. All of them.
I don't agree with that.
Wait, let's go back here, and then we're going to come. I just said something that could legitimately be challenged.
Well, I'm not challenging you yet.
Good.
I have two major concerns. One is about education, which Charlie mentioned before, and mainly because parents think that they can have books removed from the library, which offends me the most. I mean, there is no way that they should be able to censor what is in the library of a school. The library gives choices, and they're not being assigned by teachers. That's my major concern. My number two concern are the two pieces of legislation that are coming up about voting rights. You were talking about civil rights, but you didn't talk about the two pieces of legislation that are now coming up and are now going to be condemned by two people in the Senate. I mean, we're allowing two people to change what's happening in the whole United States of America, and it's offensive. And I don't believe Kristen Sinema has any principles whatsoever. I think she votes according to whoever is supporting her financially at the moment.
Unlike all the other senators who never let their financial support influence them one way or the other. No, I think after 2022, it's going to be a whole new world. I think the voting rights is dead. Let's just forget about it. It's not going to happen. It's tragic. Just as I happen to think that many of the changes in the Build Back Better Act, I do think it's important for child care for working mothers. I think it doesn't affect any of us, but I'll tell you, for that woman who is the only source of support for her family, not to be able to work now because she can't pay for child support, or because child support is so expensive, or school costs. I mean, I'm telling you, it's just, and so but come 2022, given the election law changes, certainly 24, but I think 22 will be the end of Congress as we know it. And I'm saying that, I don't mean only a Democratic Congress would be good. I think if the Republican Congress were to deal with the problems, and I look at some of the people in the Republican Party today, especially those running for office in now Democratic constituencies, we're talking about people who just don't believe there ought to be a government. Do we really want, what's that woman's name, Marjorie?
Taylor Greene.
Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, does she really represent those of you here who are Republicans? Is that the kind of thinking you want? And what's happening, as I understand it, in election after election, we're going to get more of those and fewer Jimmy Stewarts. And I'd love it if all the Republicans were Jimmy Stewarts. I'd probably be one.
Challenge your statement about no state is.
Wait a minute. Wait, Forrest!
I'm sorry, be still talking, but the point you made earlier about none of these changes in the voting laws were toward more voting. The state of New York, as you well know, is legalized it so you don't even have to be a citizen of the U.S.
In New York City.
Local election.
And a local election, yeah. But that's the difference. I mean, I happen to think if you live in that city and issues about city government are important, even if you're not a citizen, you ought to be able to say something about city affairs. I don't think they're
I don't think if you're not a citizen, why should you have any?
It's a good question and possibly true. Forrest's last comment, if you're not a citizen, you shouldn't have any right to vote on any issues, and I think that there's some value to that. Go ahead, Doug.
I might go back and I guess challenge your statement about the intensity of the partisanship in the country. Now, I'll use, first of all, West Virginia as an example. You said West Virginia has become a Republican state. Of course, Manchin ran as a Democrat, was elected as a Democrat. He's a former governor of West Virginia
As a Democrat.
as a Democrat. I think in the case of West Virginia, it's not Republican or Democrat, it's energy policy. And the majority of people in West Virginia found that the energy policy put forth by the Democratic Party was very offensive to them. And that's what pushed them over. It was the issue, not that they're, quote, historically Republican. I'll move down to Virginia with the recent election in Virginia. That was on the issue of education. It wasn't on all the, it wasn't that the Republicans got more Republicans out. It was an issue of education. And when you look at the people that are registered as Republicans or registered as Democrats, they're roughly, maybe 1/3. The biggest group is the independents that are governed. Really, their vote is by issue, not by whether someone's a Republican or a Democrat.
Good points. Good points. I mean, if it were so that in state after state, the issue was decided by people who intelligently looked at the issue and made a decision based on the issue, I'd take comfort whether they decided against my views or not. I'd say, hey, look, people were serious. I just don't think of a Marjorie Taylor Greene as that serious on the issues. It's not that I disagree with, just that we disagree on the issues. I don't think she takes it seriously, Don.
I think we have to keep in mind, society is changing. For example, and this was in the news recently, I think many of you probably heard it. In 1960, 38% of the total U.S. population was considered to have been middle class. And at that time, we had a population of about 200 million. And also, I might add, just to tack on that, about 47% of the total non-governmental workforce was unionized. In 2020, only 23% of the total population is now considered to be in the middle class. And in addition to that, and we're pushing 350,000 people. And less than 10% of the workforce is unionized. But the significance is times are changing. We've got this 15 percentage points of tens of millions of people have disappeared, if you will, from the middle class. Where did they go? Well, some went up. I happen to be one of them. But others, most of them went down. And then where did you see those people? Where are those people? Well, I think you saw a sampling of them on January 6th last year. Those people in that group that were out there, who were they? They were not derelicts. They were well dressed. They were a few of them had
military dress.
But most of them were properly dressed for a January day. So they were not derelicts. They were not alcoholics. They were not drug people. But most significantly, they were not black people. They were white people. You played hell finding a black face in that crowd. And so these are, in my opinion, were people from this middle class, either no longer in it, or some of them probably are still in it, but they're very concerned about the fact of where they sit and how everything is going. So the whole problem has to be addressed much more generally, it seems to me, because society is changing, and if you don't recognize that, if you want to say, we want to keep it the way it is. You can't keep it the way it is. It's constantly changing. And you can direct it, deflect it, but I might say a little bit this way or that. But another little tidbit of statistic that came in the news recently. In the last year, in 2020, 40% of the babies born in the United States were born out of wedlock. 40% were little bastards, if you will. And what does that mean? That means more single-parent families, which means what? More need for childcare, for need for healthcare, more need for. And you think if you can walk away from that as a government and say, we're not going to do this, I think you're just dreaming dreams, because that's la la land. It's not going to be that way.
Thanks, Don. The frustration I have with that, because I think all of these things are happening, changes in society. I'm not going to talk about that. Charlie had his hand up. I'll come back to my important point.
Mike? Thank you. We've been hearing several times over the past weeks and months and year that this country is fractured. And probably is. I remember 50 years ago, I had a motorcycle accident, broke my leg in 2 places, fractured, but it healed. And I'm not totally disturbed by the word fracture, because I think that's part of what we do, part of our system. We have a fracture, it heals, but only waiting for the next fracture. And that's what causes change. And that's where we are with that.
Thank you. Interesting. I mean, I just had a broken arm, as you know, and the fracture has healed, and I'd like to think that I feel as benign toward the political system as I now do my right arm. Don has more.
We talk about fracture. This whole concept of this country splitting up is not new. It happened quite similarly back in the 1840s and 1850s, just before the Civil War came along. And this kind of atmosphere was very prevalent then. And is this going to lead to a similar situation? Or I don't think armed conflict will occur, but it could be some means of fracturing, of separating, and maybe going to a system of, first of all, I think realistically you got to get rid of the states. Lots of luck, huh? But if you set up a governance, in my opinion, that looks something like the European Union, that you might make this place work if you split it up into 5 or 6 different regions and had a regional governments and then an umbrella government taking care of national defense and a banking system and so forth. Might function, but the way this is going now, unless something changes radically in the psychology of the people who are in the government, the elected government, it's not going to go well.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I'm going to come back to that thought. Forrest? Thank you for waiting. That's nice of you to do. That's very nice.
Next meeting, you're going to bring your own mic.
Bob, I think that we're talking about fracture, and we know how the Congress operates or doesn't operate, which is kind of painful to watch. And I think most people in America dial the Congress out. They don't do anything. They just bitch at each other, and nothing happens. To a large extent, I think that's what the country wants. But I do believe that most people, when you really drill down into their difference with me or mine with them, I think we're really not that far apart. We're far apart on an individual issue here and there, whether abortion is a very threatening issue to some people, and to others they feel extreme the other way. But you get past the things like that are trigger points, I think 80%, 90% maybe, we tend to agree. I mean, you and I can argue like the Dickinson, I consider you a friend. And I think that's largely true in the country.
You know, that's a hopeful thing to say, Forrest. My sense is that the polarization is far more in the noise, but the noise is dominating. I wish we could say Congress is, in truth, those guys are going to get along and they're going to meet each other and smile and be pleasant. Democrats and Republicans? Not very often anymore.
I know it's not what it once was.
You know, and certainly not dinner, because they don't live in Washington anymore. They don't have their dinners there. We've got 10 minutes left. Let me just try to reflect on a couple of things. In terms of thinking about where we go with meetings in 2022. I think we ought to anticipate the implications of November's election and maybe invite some people who could shed more light on that. I don't know how it will affect us here in Florida, although I think that there are definitely going to be there are implications to our voting law changes, even here in Florida, and where this state is going. But I'd be interested, I think, further explore the separation and the implications of that separation come November. Because I suspect it's going to be the beginning of a long, for those of us on the Democratic side, a long, dark night.
I was fascinated by the Wall Street Journal this week talking about Hillary running in 24. And obviously the Republicans have a similar issue that Trump wants to run again.
That'd be a great contest with it, Hillary and Trump. What an interesting concept.
Well, Hillary won 57 counties last time, I should remind you.
Oh, I know, it's just talking about deja vu all over again.
But to me, that would just be the most painful presidential re-election campaign ever, but it shows the humor of the whole operation.
So you've got that on one hand, on the other is Tom Friedman's editorial, which I thought was interesting. What about a Biden-Cheney combination?
I said he was going to look
The problem is,
I think the 2024 presidential election will be very competitive. One possible candidate would be Manchin as on the Democratic side. Now, he may be a minority in the Democratic Party today, but when you look at the option of a Republican or Manchin, I think Manchin would have a very credible opportunity to be the next president of the United States.
interesting. I think that Sally Ann has speculated on that too.
Yeah, can I just
Great minds think
can I
alike.
say something about that?
Yeah, wait, we want to hear you.
Well, not necessarily. I'm only going to say something because, interestingly enough, the right side of this room hasn't
Has spoken more than the left.
said too much. And we're going to just try to catch up to that left side of the room, regardless of where people fall politically. I agree with what Doug just said about Manchin. Personally, I said for several months that I think, which is not important to anybody, that the man is running for president. I think that's what this whole drama that he's creating is all about. Television has changed politics tremendously, and cable news entered that picture and became competitive and so forth and so on. And America is kind of, in my opinion, not Vickers Landing, thank God, but mostly a Kardashian society, with a little bit of Jerry Springer thrown in. And we like these sort of reality dramas that happen. I mean, that's Trump's greatest success, was he appealed to this. I personally have enjoyed the boredom of President Biden. It's been calm, it's been peaceful. I happen to like peace. I'm always looking for a new way to have peace. So this has been, and Kamala Harris couldn't be more boring. So she's been, for me, disappointing. I wanted a woman to, raise a little hell. That didn't happen. Having grown up in Washington, I've grown up around politicians. My family is a political family since the time of Roosevelt. And I will tell you that people always got along, were always extremely interesting and interesting to each other.
Yeah.
I think that the fracture in the country and in the government goes right down to the people in this room. And I think we all say we're friends, but who do you want to have dinner with? It's scary sometimes to be with people who are so strongly committed to one side or another. We can get together for dinner and talk about the weather, but how nice it would be to establish some sort of peaceful intellectual camaraderie. I think it just, we've got to get more human in this COVID epidemic. Who were we paying some attention to for the first time? We were paying attention to the stock boys, people who work in warehouses, nurses, just people who show up in public so we can get our food were suddenly defined as heroes. And yet there's a resistance to raising the salaries of those people, which is creating this class war of the very rich, the very poor, and no middle class.
Well, thank you for that insightful bit of.
Boy, you're playing that well. Keep it up. Let's see how you
I'm going to have dinner tonight. I'm going to be very careful.
I think we should shuffle everybody together and have tables of four.
I'm
tribes.
It's time.
Separate by tribes.
going to know what those people.
It's time to sing Kumbaya again.
I'm going to know what the people who are going to nominate Manchin as a Democratic candidate are smoking, because whatever it is, it's getting pretty high. What Democratic convention goer is going to say, "Oh, I want Joe Manchin"? As much as I agree, but think about it.
But I had something about Senator Manchin. Several months ago at this meeting, I described him as a profile in courage, and I still believe that. However, he did put forward $1.7 trillion that he could have negotiated, and they walked away from that.
That is my
Now, he would not have been a profile in courage if that had passed. To me, 1.7 trillion. I don't know all the details of it, but I presume some of it was for family care,
Oh, yeah.
child care.
All right.
And that was turned down. Why? We talk about that one Republican, I don't even know her, but I know she's terrible, what her name is. But, you do have a squad, too. Come on, there's crap on both sides.
Oh, listen, I don't give any credit to anybody for solving the political problems of this country, because I think they're worse now than ever. Forrest, and we're starting to run out of time.
I think that Sinema and Manchin save the Democratic Party from themselves.
Why has the whole world forgotten about one word, compromise, and caring for the country, not the party?
Good point. Right.
With that, we should end.
I don't know, kumbaya. Okay, so I'm thinking out loud now. Let's maybe get Republican and Democratic Party officials who could talk a little bit about what each party is doing in this area as we build toward the election. I'm just thinking out loud. Could be interesting. Certainly, I think deeper dive onto energy. What are the implications of the Democratic, quote-unquote, war on coal? Have the Democrats really changed energy use in this country? Or has energy use changed because of the price competition between fracking gas and coal? Personally, I think coming from energy, it's all economics. There's very little politics involved in the shifts of energy usage. And that's, I don't think that's something politicians, as much as they talk about changing, I don't think they're changing very much.
We talk about energy, we talk about nuclear too.
Oh, and nuclear, coal, oil, gas, wind. And so maybe some people to talk about that. And any suggestions you may have are welcome. I'm also going to rattle the cages of some of the people I used to work with. On the economy, I think it might be interesting to find some people who could talk to us a little bit about that. Although I don't know that there's anybody more intelligent than the people in this room that we could get to talk, but that's a possibility. Certainly energy, the political process, where we're going in that political process. Can the two sides ever get together? Education. We talked a little bit about, not a little bit, we devoted a lot of meetings to education last year. Chartrand, maybe that was the only one really focused on energy. on education. We talked about it. Parvez, but he really came to talk about, theoretically, about economic issues, and I mean, he's an economics professor, and he has this job, interestingly enough, of diversity, which means he's supposed to increase the number of non-whites at UNF, and that raises a whole lot of other issues here. A lot of different things to talk about.
How about what's going on in the Florida legislature, which is meeting right now at this point? I'd like to know what's going on.
It's a great idea. Who knows who our legislative representative is for?
It's Cindy Stevenson. I've asked you about her.
Cindy Stevenson is our representative.
Do you know her?
Yes.
Well, then you just volunteered to invite her to speak.
Of course. I would be happy to.
It's not what you know.
Good. So there's a rich agenda possible for us as we go into this year. My biggest, let's do it differently. We've got a few minutes. What are the biggest concerns of the people here? If you had to say, this is the issue that has me most afraid, what would it be?
Polarization.
Governance.
I'm totally on board with Don. Did I hear anything else?
Yeah, the polarization.
Polarization, I think, fits into the governance thing. I actually envision a time, and I worked it through my own mind, the footprint, this democracy we live in today was never intended to be democratic. The original Constitution provided for only white men with property to vote. No women, no non-whites, no non-property whites. Slowly but surely, we've chipped away at that part of the undemocratic footprint. But it took a long time. Think about it. We have voting rights acts in front of Congress today that are dead, that were dealing essentially with the same issue the constitutional framers struggled with 200 years ago. And that process of making it more and more and more a democracy is one that's, fits and starts to get us to where we are today. And I don't think we're there yet. And part of the reason for that is the second big undemocratic part of what the Constitution did. The first being the definition of a person, white property male. But the idea that small states had to have the same representation as large states, which was required when there were 13, 19, however many signed the Constitution, required then, and for different reasons, states had greater arguments in favor of their sovereignty. Personally, and I used to do this all the time as a kid, I'd drive over to the Idaho-Wyoming line, and I'd try to say, where is this mark in the dirt that says if I'm over there, I'm proud of my sovereign state of Wyoming, and if I'm over here, I'm proud of my sovereign state of Idaho. What a bit of difference between the two. Somebody drew a line. And now we're holding those states as absolutely sacrosanct. And the states that have 2 senators and 300,000 people, or 700,000 people, will soon be, especially if the changes that are going in now, governing this country more even now than they do today. Does that leave California and New York on the outside saying you don't share our views even though we're more people? And if we lived in a state that had only 700,000 people, would we be happy having New York decide our governments? Probably not. Well, does that mean ultimately that the states that have no population are going to have to be in a separate country from the states that have a lot of population? Going back to Don's thing. Are we going to have a regional kind of, we're not set up to go to a regional kind of government. We're not set up to do anything other than manage ourselves, I believe, into a stalemate of unpopulated states with 2 senators and populated states with a lot of people. And I just don't know how you resolve that. It's, unlike the filibuster, which is easy to change because it's not in the Constitution, 2 votes per state. That's in the Constitution.
What about California making itself into 3 states, and New York could be 3 states, the Adirondacks, the southern and the western?
Can you see a lot of Republicans supporting that? I can. Okay, you see a lot of Republicans supporting statehood from
Plus,
Washington?
the upstate New York and the West New York are all Republicans. It's only, oh yeah, it's only the southern part of New York that's
That's where
Democrat.
you have the most people.
But
That's
still,
where you have the most people, yeah, but
Okay.
they'd be a different state,
I hear what you're saying, that just increases the number of small states with 2 senators.
yeah.
Doug?
Wait.
Talking about New York or California is all theoretical. This is a real possibility. When Texas, the independent Republic of Texas, joined the United States, part of the agreement was, because of the size of Texas, it could subsequently divide it into as many as 5 states. So we could actually, under the present legal structure, end up with 10 senators from the states of Texas.
I hope all not named Cruz, but it's possible. No, but I think these are issues that, as difficult as they are to even contemplate today, they're going to be increasingly important as these elections increasingly favor the small states with 2 senators. And it doesn't take very much of a change from where we are today to an interesting level of stalemate. A lot of very interesting conversation possibilities. Charlie, do you have something more to bring it to a close?
Yeah, this should bring it to a close. The expression that we hear often is, we're talking about government, talking about individuals, it makes me sick. Well, that's an interesting statement. How sick do you get? Are you physically sick? Can you unable to deal with life now because of what's going on? Maybe we ought to have a doctor come here and talk about what makes us sick, or what makes us really sick, and what do we do about it?
Did I say that makes me sick? I makes me want to break my other arm. Well, sick is the wrong word. The good news about all of this, and I've thought about this a lot in terms of the 22 election, the 24 election, there are not many of those left for any of us.
Sad is the right.
There's, in a way, we're talking about what kind of a government are we going to, a country are we going to leave for our children and grandchildren? And then what influence we have, although I think it's pretty strong in this room, will soon no longer be brought to bear.
May I?
Please.
I think some people have touched upon it, but the elephant in the room is our former president, who is still fomenting the fact that he thinks he won. Is that going to have a huge influence on the election in November? Are there still people that think his candidates will win and that he has influence? I mean, it's inconceivable to me, but he still goes on and on. This has never, ever happened before.
Out of curiosity, how many people here believe, because I know there are several Republicans who believe that the election was won by Trump? We're at 1?
I think there's some
Please get out of the way.
Yeah, they're gonna get paid as much as
The
I
only thing
do.
I'm trying to say, I want to add to that is I feel like that there were some changes made that some states that were illegal because they didn't follow the state constitution. That's my only comment in that regard.
We're not typical.
Thank you, and those changes I think were made at the time because of COVID and a concern about the voting things, but maybe there was a sinister force behind it. But the fact of the matter is we've got a 50-50 Senate, and that kind of sort of tells us where the country is. And I think we're probably going to have something close to that. We're certainly not going to have 60-40 again for a long time. And that goes back to the question of the filibuster. Where is it going to go? We've used more than our time. Charlie just pointed out that I have to start paying Ken overtime if I don't stop talking. And time and a half on his present salary we can't afford. Thank you all. Current Events is back. We'll see you next Friday, and there'll be more.